Why is my husband sitting at the family table with another woman in my seat?
Because she belongs there.
Good, then he can leave with her.
My name is Claire Bennett, and the night my brother-in-law got married, I wore the wrong color. Not by accident. By design. Every woman in my husband's family had been assigned a shade by my mother-in-law Lillian. The bridesmaids wore dusty rose. The cousins wore sage green. The older aunts wore champagne. Lillian had spent 3 weeks calling women, as if she were organizing a military operation instead of a wedding. When she called me, she said, "Claire, I assume you will choose something appropriate." I told her I would. Then I bought an ivory dress. It was structured, simple, and expensive in the quiet way that made people look twice. It was not a bridal gown. No reasonable person could mistake it for one. But in Lillian's world, ivory meant one thing. It meant I had refused to be arranged. My husband, Evan, did not notice until we were already driving to the estate. He glanced at me at a red light and frowned. "Is that what you're wearing?" "Yes. My mother is going to say something." "I know." He tightened his hands on the steering wheel. That should have been the moment he asked why I wanted to provoke her. It should have been the moment he asked whether I was all right. Instead, he sighed like I had created extra work for him. That was Evan's special talent. He could turn my pain into an inconvenience he had to manage. We had been married for 4 years. I was 36, a corporate attorney on the partnership track at a large firm in the city. Evan was a project director at an architecture company downtown. We had a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood, 2 reliable cars, good salaries, and the kind of life that looked stable in holiday photographs. From the outside, we were successful. Inside our house, I had been lonely for years. Evan loved me the way some people love an expensive painting. He admired me when other people were watching. He mentioned my job at dinner parties. He introduced me as my brilliant wife. But when I came home exhausted after a 14-hour day, he rarely asked what had happened. If I tried to explain, his attention drifted toward his phone. I paid the down payment on our house. We put both names on the title. Evan called that fairness. His mother called it luck. Lillian had never openly said she disliked me. She was too polished for that. Her cruelty arrived through small omissions. She forgot to include me in family emails. She invited Evan to Sunday dinner and told him to bring Claire if she is free, even when she knew I was standing beside him. She spoke warmly about his college girlfriend at holidays, then looked at me with an innocent smile. Once, during Christmas dinner, I took off my wedding ring to wash dishes. Lillian noticed my bare hand and said to the room, "Some women never feel complete without jewelry." Everyone laughed. Evan poured himself more wine. That was our marriage in one moment. His mother aimed the knife. Everyone pretended it was a joke. Evan watched me bleed and decided silence was neutrality. My brother-in-law, Marcus, was different. He was younger than Evan, less polished, and more honest. His bride, Julia, was the only person in that family who treated me as if I belonged. She had a loud laugh, a warm heart, and no patience for hidden insults. Months before the wedding, Julia asked me to review the venue contract. I found several unfair penalty clauses and negotiated them out. I saved Marcus and Julia almost $8,000. Julia sent flowers to my office. Lillian sent me a message that said, "How fortunate your work was useful." The wedding took place at a restored estate 40 minutes outside the city. The building had stone walls, tall windows, and a grand staircase decorated with white flowers. Staff members moved through the halls in black uniforms, speaking softly into small radios. The ceremony was beautiful. When Julia walked down the aisle, Marcus looked at her with an expression I had never seen on Evan's face. It was not pride. It was not possession. It was wonder. I watched Marcus look at his wife, and something inside me went very still. The reception began in a ballroom overlooking the gardens. At the entrance, escort cards were arranged on a long table. Evan found his first. Table 3. I found mine a few seconds later. Table 11. I held both cards in my hands. Evan looked from one to the other. "There must be a mistake," he said. "Probably. We found Lillian near the bar. She was surrounded by her sisters, holding a glass of white wine and laughing. When she saw us, her expression changed for half a second. Then the perfect smile returned. "Doesn't everything look stunning?" she asked. Evan showed her the cards. He explained the problem carefully. He called it a mix-up twice. Lillian tilted her head and touched his arm. "Oh, sweetheart, it isn't a mix-up. We ran out of room at the family tables." She looked at me. "Table 11 is lovely. It is near the windows." Evan opened his mouth. Lillian had already turned back to her sisters. I placed both escort cards in my purse. Then I walked to the restroom, locked myself inside a stall, and stood there for 90 seconds without moving. I was not crying. I was calculating. For 9 years, I had made a living noticing details people hoped I would ignore. A wrong date in a contract. A missing signature. A payment routed through an unfamiliar company. People thought corporate law was about knowing rules. It was really about recognizing patterns. And suddenly, my marriage looked like a pattern. I took out my phone and texted Dana, my paralegal, "Please send me the final venue contract and every addendum from the Henderson Marsh file." Dana had worked with me for 6 years. She knew when not to ask questions. 4 minutes later, she replied, "Sent." "Are you okay?" I typed, "Getting there." I washed my hands and looked at myself in the mirror. The ivory dress looked almost silver under the bright lights. I had worn it to make a statement to Lillian. I did not yet understand that she had prepared a statement of her own. When I returned to the ballroom, I looked at table 3. It was the immediate family table. Lillian sat beside my father-in-law. Marcus and Julia had 2 seats waiting for them. Evan's grandparents were there. An aunt and uncle from Phoenix were there. And sitting in the chair that should have been mine was Natalie Shaw. Natalie worked with Evan. For 6 months, she had appeared in the background of his company's social media posts. She stood beside him at site visits. She sat next to him at client dinners. Once, when I asked why she seemed to be everywhere, Lillian smiled and said, "They work closely together. It is sweet how dedicated she is." Natalie wore sage green. She had been assigned a family color. Her hand rested on the back of Evan's chair. She was laughing at something my father-in-law had said. Evan stood beside her, smiling. For 10 seconds, I watched my husband look comfortable in the life his mother had arranged for him. Then I found Marcus. He was near the bar with Julia and 2 friends. The second he saw my face, he excused himself and came toward me. I told him the facts. My card said table 11. Evan said table 3. Natalie was in the missing family seat. Marcus's face changed. "I am fixing this right now." I touched his arm. "No, this is your wedding. Do not let your mother damage your night, too." I did not approve this. "I believe you." "I am sorry, Claire." "I know. Go dance with your wife." I walked to table 11. It was near the windows, exactly as Lillian had promised. The other 7 guests were former coworkers of Julia. They were kind, funny, and completely unaware that I had been placed there as punishment. I introduced myself. I drank 1 glass of wine. I ate the salmon. I laughed when everyone else laughed. From across the room, I watched Evan twice. Both times, he was laughing with Natalie. He did not check on me once. After dinner, I stayed for 1 hour and 40 minutes. Long enough to protect Julia from gossip. Long enough to make sure no one could say I had caused a scene. Then I walked to table 3 and touched Evan's shoulder. "I'm going home." I whispered. "You should stay." He looked surprised. "Claire, wait. Please stay." He must have heard something in my voice because he stopped arguing. I found Julia before I left. She hugged me and whispered, "You did not deserve tonight." I told her, "That has been true of more nights than you know." Her eyes filled with tears. I kissed her cheek and told her not to ruin her makeup. Then I drove home alone. The highway was nearly empty. I did not turn on the radio. I wanted silence because silence could not lie to me. At home, I opened the venue documents Dana had sent. The original contract included a final seating chart deadline. The bride and groom had approval rights. That matched what I remembered. Then I found an addendum dated 5 days before the wedding. It authorized a late seating change and a rush printing fee of $1,250. The request had been submitted from Evan's work email. My husband had not discovered the seating arrangement beside me at the reception. He had approved it 5 days earlier. I read the page 3 times. Attached to the addendum was a short message from Evan to the venue coordinator. Please move Claire to table 11. Natalie Shaw should be seated with the immediate family. My mother will handle any questions. There are moments when betrayal feels dramatic. A scream. A broken glass. A door slammed hard enough to shake the walls. This was not like that. This betrayal felt cold. It felt like a room losing heat. I sat at the kitchen table in the house I had paid for, wearing the dress I had chosen as an act of defiance, and realized my husband had spent the evening pretending to be confused. He had stood beside me while his mother humiliated me and acted as if he were innocent. That was worse than the seating chart. The cruelty had been planned. The innocence had been performed. I opened a new document and began writing a timeline. At midnight, Evan came home. He saw my laptop and stopped in the doorway. What are you doing? Working. He sat across from me. About tonight, he began. I know. My mother should not have done that. No. She should not have. I should have said something. I turned the laptop toward him. The addendum was open on the screen. For the first time that night, Evan looked afraid. I asked one question. How long? He looked down. Claire, it is complicated. How long? Nothing happened at first. That answer told me everything. People only say nothing happened at first when something happened later. I closed the laptop. You will sleep in the guest room tonight. Can we talk? We are talking. I never wanted to hurt you. You requested a printed card with my name on it and placed it 11 tables away from my husband. You paid extra to make sure the humiliation happened correctly. He flinched. My mother thought it would avoid a scene. Natalie sitting beside you at the family table was supposed to avoid a scene. He said nothing. I stood. Guest room. We will speak tomorrow. I did not sleep. Instead, I reviewed 4 years of financial statements. I did not access anything private or illegal. I looked only at joint accounts, shared cards, household records, and documents already stored in our home office. Once I started, the pattern appeared quickly. There were restaurant charges on nights. Evan claimed to be working late. There were furniture purchases from a store across town. There was a monthly payment to a limited liability company called Northline Studio. Northline Studio had never been mentioned to me. At 6 in the morning, I searched our shared files and found a scanned lease guarantee. Evan had personally guaranteed a downtown studio apartment for Northline. The tenant listed on the lease was Natalie Shaw. The security deposit had come from our home equity line of credit. $32,000 had been transferred over 8 months. My husband had not only been having an affair. He had used our house to finance it. At 7:30, I called my mother. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked, "What do you need?" "Not are you sure?" "Not maybe you misunderstood. What do you need?" "A family law attorney," I said. She gave me a name, Patricia Cole. Patricia spoke with me that morning for nearly an hour. I sent her the venue addendum, the lease guarantee, the account statements, and my timeline. She was quiet while she read. Then she said, "You are going to be fine." She did not mean the next few months would be easy. She meant I had evidence, resources, and choices. That mattered. Before I confronted Evan again, Patricia told me to protect access to my personal income, preserve records, and avoid emotional threats. I followed her advice exactly. By noon, my salary was going into an individual account. I had copies of every relevant document. I had changed the passwords to my personal email and work devices. I did not empty joint accounts. I did not destroy anything. I did not give Evan a reason to claim I was reckless. At 2 that afternoon, we sat at the kitchen table. Evan looked exhausted. I ended it with Natalie, he said. I placed the lease guarantee between us. When? He stared at the document. Claire. When did you end it? This morning. I almost laughed. He had ended the affair after I found the paperwork. He wanted credit for closing a door I had already opened. How long have you been paying for the studio? It was not for us. Natalie wanted to start a design business. With $32,000 from our home. I was going to replace it. When? He rubbed his face. After my promotion. There it was. The promotion. Evan had been waiting for a senior director position, expected to be announced at the end of the year. He had planned to replace the money after receiving a larger bonus. He had also planned to leave me after the promotion, when his income looked stronger and his new life was ready. The wedding seating chart had not been a random act of cruelty. It had been a rehearsal. Lillian had placed Natalie at the family table, so everyone could begin accepting her. I was moved near the windows so I could watch my own replacement being introduced. Evan looked at me and said, "I did not know how to tell you. You knew how to email the venue." He started crying then. I had seen Evan cry only twice before. Once when his grandfather died, and once when his favorite team lost a championship game in overtime. That afternoon, his tears did not move me. They felt like another negotiation. He talked about pressure. He talked about my long hours. He said Natalie understood his work. He said I had become distant. I listened. When he finished, I said, "Thank you for being honest." He looked relieved. Then I continued. "I want you to stay with your parents. Patricia will contact your attorney." His face changed. "You already hired a lawyer. Wes. You did all of this overnight." "No, Evan. You did this over 8 months. I understood it overnight." He left that evening with 2 suitcases. Lillian called me 9 times. I did not answer. On the 10th call, she left a message. She said I was overreacting. She said marriage required forgiveness. She said Natalie was confused and vulnerable. Then she said the seating chart had been her idea, as if claiming responsibility would protect her son. She did not know I had his email. I saved the message. The next day, I called Julia. I told her enough to explain why I was filing for divorce. I did not ask her to choose sides. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Marcus found the final seating spreadsheet this morning. His mother changed it after we approved the original." Ivan approved the change. Julia inhaled sharply. "I am so sorry. I know. What are you going to do? Stop protecting him from the consequences of his own decisions." That became my plan. Not destruction, not public revenge consequences. The divorce lasted 9 months. At first, Evan's attorney argued that the money sent to Northline Studio was a joint investment. Patricia asked for the business records. That was when the second surprise appeared. Northline was not simply Natalie's design studio. It had received consulting payments from 2 vendors working on Evan's architecture projects. Evan had approved those vendors. Natalie's company had been paid as an outside consultant, even though she was already an employee at the same firm. The arrangement created a serious conflict of interest. I did not report it to Evan's employer. I did not need to. Once the records entered formal discovery, Evan's own attorney warned him that hiding them could create larger legal problems. Evan disclosed the conflict to his company before someone else did. The company opened an internal review. His promotion disappeared. 3 weeks later, he was placed on unpaid leave. Lillian sent me a message accusing me of ruining his career. I replied with 1 sentence. I did not sign the approvals. Then I blocked her. At mediation, Evan looked smaller than I remembered. Natalie had ended their relationship shortly after the company investigation began. Northline had no real clients without the vendor payments. The apartment lease was still guaranteed by Evan. He had lost the marriage, the promotion, and the woman he had planned to replace me with. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired. Patricia handled the numbers. The $32,000 taken from our home equity was credited to me in the settlement. Evan assumed responsibility for the studio lease and related debt. I bought out his remaining share of the house, using a valuation that reflected the debt he had created. He also agreed to pay part of my legal fees because he had failed to disclose the Northline transfers in his first financial statement. That was the closest thing to revenge I needed. The truth did the work for me. Lillian attended one mediation session without being invited. She arrived wearing pearls and carrying a leather folder. She announced that she was there to explain the family situation. The mediator asked her to leave. According to Patricia, Lillian stood in the hallway for 20 minutes before security escorted her downstairs. I wish I could say I did not enjoy hearing that. I did. 4 months into the case, Ivan called me directly, even though our attorneys had asked us not to discuss the settlement without them. His voice sounded quiet. I wish I had handled everything differently, he said. I believe you. I never thought it would become this. That is because you only imagined the part where I stayed quiet. He was silent. Then he said, my mother pushed the wedding idea. You sent the email. I know. You paid the fee. I know. You sat beside Natalie and laughed while I ate dinner with strangers. I know. For the first time, he did not offer an explanation. He simply said, I am sorry. I believed he was sorry. But regret is not repair. Sometimes people are deeply sorry only after the cost finally reaches them. I told him, I hope you become someone who never does this again. Then I ended the call. A week later, I received a handwritten letter from Lillian. It was 3 pages long. She wrote that I had always cared more about my career than my marriage. She wrote that Evan felt invisible beside me. She wrote that Natalie was softer, more supportive, and better suited to family life. On the final page, the ink changed slightly. Lillian admitted she had designed the wedding seating plan. She said she wanted the family to understand that changes were coming. She believed seeing Natalie beside Evan would make the transition easier later. Then she wrote, I did not expect you to leave that night and destroy everything. I read that sentence twice. In Lillian's mind, my leaving had destroyed the marriage. Not the affair. Not the stolen money. Not the secret business. Not the public humiliation. My refusal to remain seated at table 11 was the unforgivable act. I folded the letter, placed it in a manila folder, and labeled it. I am a lawyer. When I do not know what to do with something, I preserve it. The divorce became final on a Tuesday in November. I was at work, preparing for a merger closing, when Patricia texted me at 2:47 in the afternoon. It is done. I finished my call. I told my assistant I was stepping out. Then I walked to the coffee shop on the corner and sat beside the window. For 15 minutes, I watched strangers pass on the sidewalk. No music played. No one applauded. There was no dramatic feeling of freedom. There was only quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet from the silence in my marriage. That silence had been full of things I was afraid to say. This quiet belonged to me. I still live in the house. I replaced the living room furniture, not because the old furniture was damaged, but because Evan had chosen all of it. I painted the bedroom a deep blue Lillian once called too dark. I removed the house phone she had insisted we keep. The first morning after it was disconnected, I stood in the kitchen and waited for a ring that never came. I smiled. I learned I prefer silence before sunrise. I learned I had been waking up tense for years without understanding why. Within 2 weeks of living alone, I slept through the night for the first time in months. My body had recognized the truth before my mind accepted it. Julia and I still have dinner every few weeks. Marcus comes sometimes, but he usually finds an excuse to leave early so Julia and I can talk. They stopped spending holidays with Lillian after she blamed Julia for giving me information during the divorce. I never asked them to make that choice. Lillian made it for them. Last month, Julia sent a small cactus to my office. The card said, "Still thriving without much water." I placed it on my kitchen windowsill. Every morning, the sunlight hits it before anything else in the room. I have not spoken to Lillian since her letter. I have not spoken to Evan since the divorce became final. I heard through Marcus that Evan eventually left the architecture firm. He moved to another city and took a smaller position. Natalie closed Northline Studio. I do not know whether they speak. I no longer need to know. There is one last thing I think about sometimes. On the morning of the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror wearing the ivory dress. I knew exactly what the color meant in that family. I knew Lillian would notice. I knew she would interpret it as disrespect. At the time, I told myself I was being defiant. That was true. But it was not the whole truth. The ivory dress was the first honest thing I had done in a long time. I had spent 4 years trying to become the right color for other people. Softer at dinner, quieter around his mother. Less successful when Avon felt insecure. More grateful when he offered me the smallest amount of attention. I had adjusted myself so often that I no longer knew what I looked like without permission. Then, on one important night, I refused the assigned color. Lillian thought she had seated me outside the family. Evan thought he had moved me safely out of the way. Neither of them understood that table 11 gave me the best view in the room. From there, I finally saw my marriage clearly. I wore the wrong color to a wedding. And for the first time in years, I became the right woman for my own life. Disclaimer: this story is fictional and created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is coincidental.